I'm elated to have some distinguished guests with me tonight. I'm elated to have State Senator Eric Lesser. He's the senator for the 1st Hampden and Hampshire District. Elated to have City Council President Justin Hurst of the Springfield City Council. And also I'm elated to have City Councilor at Large Tracye Whitfield. So I'm elated to have these distinguished guests with us tonight. Throughout tonight's conversation, you can ask questions, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So we ask that we just begin with really saying welcome. And the first question that I have for you tonight is this. Being 6 months into 2020, right? We're almost to the midway point. The question that I have is, what do you think the mood of the country is? What's the mood of the country, the mood of the Commonwealth, the mood of the city? So we'll start with you, Eric.
Well, thank you, Pastor White. I want to thank my colleagues, Councilor Whitfield and President Hurst, and it's great to be here at Mount Zion. Of course, we're respecting the social distancing guidelines, so the sanctuary is empty, but I know people are watching from a safe distance at home, and it's really an honor to be here. And I want to thank you, Pastor, for your leadership in the community, the work you've done with Dunbar here at Mount Zion. And I think that the mood of the country right now is fearful. I think people are afraid in a lot of ways. I think that the conscience of the country has been shaken in more ways than one. Certainly what we've seen with the police violence, what we've seen with the George Floyd murder, but frankly, a lot that came before that and a lot that has come after that too. And I think coronavirus and the shock of COVID-19 has in many respects awakened the country to a lot of deep systemic challenges we've had for a very long time. What I like to say is, and others have said this too, is coronavirus has revealed a lot of inequities in society rather than created them. And I think that we are at a turning point right now in terms of how we respond. Will this be a moment that diminishes America and that makes us weaker, that makes us more divided, or is this going to be a moment that shakes us awake and forces real change? And I think we don't know the answer to that just yet, and it's going to be leadership, and it's going to be a new generation of people that helps decide that.
Yeah, no, I echo the sentiments of my colleague, and first of all, I want to thank State Senator Eric Lesser for being present at the march that we had on Saturday against police brutality, as well as my colleague, Councilor Tracye Whitfield, for being present, and then some of our other leaders in government. I think now is a more important time than ever for us to actually have these conversations. So to you, Pastor Atu White, thank you so very much for at least broaching the conversations. There are a lot of issues that are impacting the citizens, not only nationally, but both in the Commonwealth and at the local level. And I think we are fearful, but at the same time, when I look at it, I'm actually fairly optimistic when I see people that are as resilient as the residents here in Springfield and certainly throughout the country. We're in the midst, and we've been in the midst of a pandemic for the last 2 to 3 months. And then when you have the George Floyd incident, the idea that people are willing in some instances to sacrifice their health because they know that change is absolutely necessary, and it's only going to come if we fight in the midst of COVID-19, to press our legislative leaders to act, to press our communities to actually come out and stand in unity for what is right. So not only is it, are folks fearful, but I also think, some of the people that have seen history repeat itself time and time again, they're actually optimistic. So I'm certainly hopeful. I'm hopeful for Springfield, and I think we'll overcome COVID-19 and some of the systems of oppression that we certainly have not been able to address for such a long time. I think we're a resilient people, and we'll certainly press forward as we've been able to do in the past.
Thank you, Pastor White, for having us today. I'm glad to be present with 2 of my favorite colleagues in government. So this is an honor to sit here with all you gentlemen today. And I also wanted to thank you for being present and doing our prayer at the march. So I think tensions are high nationally and even here in Springfield. but I mimic the sentiments of Councilor Hurst. I see a lot of optimism. I see a lot of youth coming out and using their voices, and I see a lot of folks educating people on the importance of voting, because once 45 got in a place of position, I don't like calling that man the president, but that's what he is. You've seen a lot of the racist acts coming out. You've seen a lot of those type of people coming to the forefront, but now I see a change. I see more people that want democracy out, and that want change, and that want to create the change, and I'm just very optimistic and hopeful that it's going to turn again. Like, we've come to another turning point in history where more fairness will be created. We will address the disparities of health care and food insecurities, and the racial discrimination. I just see people getting to work, and so I'm very optimistic about where the city of Springfield is going. I see that folks are ready to use their voices and call out wrong. Wrong is wrong. I know that Council President Hurst has been a voice that will call out wrong for a long time, but didn't really have the force behind him, and now he does.
That is accurate.
Excellent, excellent. If you can move your mics a little bit closer so that we can get a clearer sound, and that'll be great. I think you're good. Yeah, just a little bit closer, and just talk in it for us. And we'll try to get the best sound we can. So as it relates to the mood, right? The mood is not necessarily new, but it feels as if the country is at a standstill. I think it was one famous rapper who tweeted, I think it was Snoop Dogg, who said something to the effect of, grateful that no sports are happening, no concerts are happening, because technically what transpired in Minneapolis, if sports were going on, the news cycle would have ended very quickly. It would have had a 2 or 3 day news cycle. And what do you think is different today with the protests that are different 4 or 5 years ago, when it was about Mike Brown, when it was about Eric Gardner? What do you think is different today versus, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago?
Well,
Go ahead. I'll defer.
what I see that's different is the different faces, the different voices. I see that more white people are trying to gain understanding, and they're not trying to force us to teach them. They are trying to learn it on their own, and they're trying to educate themselves on racism and discrimination and prejudice, which are all totally different. And I just see that there's more unity, and I'm not really sure, because back in the day in the Martin Luther King era, I'm sure there was a lot of young people. I know there was a lot of young people out there protesting, but like here in the city of Springfield, we have youth from middle school all the way up through the college age and to the early 30s that are really out here, and they are reaching out, and they want help, and they want support. And so I know that we just got to be here to support them and give them the help that they need. So I mean, for me, that's the mood that I'm in, because every day I'm invited to one. So that's the mood that I indulge in, and that's what I see right now.
And,
Great.
and we're tired.
Tired.
I think people are tired. We're exhausted. And especially if you're a person of color, you've been fighting for a long time, whether it was internally or whether you were fighting against systems. Certainly the higher up you go, the more systemic oppression that you experience, and it's exhausting. And so I think right now we're on the cusp of something special. The idea that I think these marches and these protests and these demands are going to be sustained. And certainly when you don't have anything else to turn the TV to, and all you see is CNN replaying 8 minutes and 46 seconds of the killing of George Floyd, I mean, it really hits you to the core. And I don't care what color you are, it's inexcusable. And so when you also, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, see the officers around that are not doing anything, that inaction is traumatic. And so, you know, for me, I just related it to some of my other colleagues in government who oftentimes like to play it safe. And so when we highlight an issue that is clearly wrong, what oftentimes happens is that, you know, you only get a select few that are willing to put themselves at the forefront of a difficult issue. And what we're able to realize and see is that we can't be or sit on the sideline any longer. Everybody needs to play a role if we're going to move this country forward. And so just like we saw those officers sitting on the sidelines and not intervening, we oftentimes see, for me, our colleagues in government do the exact same thing when you're dealing with difficult issues. And so it just taught me that we need to do more. And when I'm watching other folks do more and say, you know what, I need to do some self-reflection. I need to look inward. That to me leaves me with a sense of optimism that we are actually going to have real change at the end of the day.
You know, just, I mean, that was ditto to everything that they said. I mean, one thing I would add that I've sort of observed I've been to 4 events in just the past week in very different communities, but one thing that I have seen in common at each one were the number of young people. And I think one kind of social experiment we're all going through as a country right now is every high school in America is closed right now. Every college in America is closed. A lot of the jobs that young people do, teenagers do in the summer, scooping ice cream, working at summer camps, you know, working, you know, as lifeguards or whatever it might be, are not there this summer because of coronavirus. And just the number of really young people that you see at these events, and they come with friends. You know, it has almost a joyous atmosphere. Obviously, a very challenging and very intense moment, but there's a joy and there's an optimism that young people bring to these struggles that I think is a big change and a big difference, and gives me a lot of optimism, because there's been no social movement in American history, you know, just to put a historian's hat on for a moment, whether it's the civil rights movement, the women's movement, you name it, the workers' movement during the Great Depression, that wasn't led by young people. And I think that's a big change and a big element of optimism, is that all these high school students, all these young people whose lives have been upended, when you think about what we've expected young people through coronavirus to go through, no school, no jobs, everything really stopped. It's shaken a consciousness that I think is really going to bring change. So I share the sentiment that there's real optimism.
And we need to channel that energy.
Exactly.
You know, we need to figure out how we can channel that energy and have it be as productive as possible when it comes to affecting real sustainable change. So, I know, that's all right. Yeah, so we have to take advantage of it. And I know for a long time, you know, I oftentimes hear, you know, we need to mentor more, we need to advise more. And this is what a fantastic opportunity that we have here now, because a lot of our young people are also new to protesting. They're new to standing up against adults in general. And so this is a unique opportunity that we have, and we certainly can't let it pass.
Yeah, and yesterday when we were doing the press release, there were some young people out there, and they were like, well, where's the people's person? I'm not going to say the name, right? They said, where's the people's person? And I said, well, we can't speak for the people's person, but we can speak for us, and we're here. And so I asked him, I said, are you registered to vote? And he said, no. So I think at every opportunity, because they can vote online, we don't have to wait. We need to educate our young people and get them registered to vote right then and there, and tell them the importance of voting, and then also tell them when to vote. Like, you're registering now, but here are the opportunities that you have to vote, and make sure you do your research and look at who's here for you right here and now, and look who's educating you on particular issues out here. And so I think that our young people and our middle-aged and our old people need to know that voting does matter, and your vote is your voice. And so if you're not voting, then you're not using your voice, and everyone should feel comfortable enough to use their voice, even if it's through a vote.
So that brings up an interesting conversation. And the part that's interesting to me is, what does it actually mean to be a constituent? And I'm going to say something because I have the license to, but I know we push voting. Voting is critical, voting is crucial, voting is imperative. And we push voting as a narrative that that's what makes you as a citizen a constituent. And I won't put you on the spot, so I'll ask it in an objective way, right? In your opinion, what makes a citizen a constituent?
They're all our constituents. If they live in the city of Springfield, they're my constituent. You know, whether you vote or not, you know, it's our duty to ensure that our citizens are able to be as productive as possible for the well-being of the entire city. And so, just because you don't vote, although I'm sure there are some folks that don't feel the same way that I do, and I actually know of an individual who, if somebody calls him and has a concern, the first thing he'll do is get their name and address, and they'll look them up in their voter database, and if they haven't voted, that'll dictate how it is that they respond to the individual. One, I don't have the time to do that. And two, oftentimes those issues that people are bringing to the forefront, even if they don't vote, are issues that are impacting those that do vote. And so they all need to be addressed equally, in my opinion.
Let me rephrase the question. I
That's a cop-out. That's a cop-out, Mr. President.
Politicians like that a loaded question, all right? So let me rephrase. Let me rephrase the conversation. Let me rephrase the question. Here's my question. What is the missing link between voting and implementing policies? Yeah. What's the missing link between people voting, UN, and then the implementation of policies?
So just one quick shameless plug on voting. We actually have right now pending in the Massachusetts legislature a vote-by-mail bill. And I think everybody saw the primaries that happened in Georgia yesterday, the horrific lines people were subjected to. People saw what happened in Wisconsin, a month, 6 weeks ago. People were being asked to vote in person in the middle of a pandemic. There were actually several dozen coronavirus cases traced back to people waiting in line to vote. We need vote by mail, universal vote by mail in Massachusetts. We need the postage paid. We actually are on the cusp of getting that done, of passing a law to make that happen. We will hopefully have it done by the end of next week, but that is right now, pending right now, which connects to the point about voting. First, I totally agree with President Hurst. A mentor of mine gave me very good advice when I first won my election, which is, he said to me, Eric, you have an obligation to represent everybody in your community, not just the Democrats and not just the Republicans, but also the people that didn't vote or don't even know that they can vote or even know who you are or can't vote. Everyone who lives in your community, you have a moral obligation to represent and to fight for. So that's absolutely right. But I would say the missing link between voting and activism is remembering that it doesn't end on election day. And it's the continued engagement and it's the continued connectivity between elected officials and their communities. And that goes both ways. We have an obligation as elected officials to be responsive, to show up, to be in touch with people, but the citizen has an obligation too, to share what's happening and to hold us accountable, and to share with us what's important to them and what's not so important. And that's an iterative process that does not begin and end on election day. That's an obligation each of us carries, and that we have to carry through. It really almost has to be a way of life. You read the news, you stay on top of things, you hold your elected officials accountable. Every once in a while you can say thank you if people are doing the right thing, but it's really more important about checking and oversight over what's happening.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. I do want to answer the question about constituents and voting as well, and then I'll talk about activism a little bit. I agree with my colleagues on what they said, but I also want to add, just because a person or a resident or a constituent aren't voting today doesn't mean they're not going to vote tomorrow. And so you use the opportunity to find out if people are voting or not, and then educate them, because I know I have changed some minds about voting when I ran the second time, because I let folks know I need them. I'm here to work for you, but if you don't vote me in, I can't do the work on a broader scale like I want to do. And then I was asked by a young person, well, we all were, because it was at the press release, you know, what type of legislation are you going to implement? How do you get that legislation? And I told them a lot of the ideas come from people just like you. You know, some of my colleagues want to come, and I created this great legislation that I'm bringing to the forefront, and it's going to change the world or how we think about this today, but they got it from, you know, someone else. They're just getting the credit for it, right? They're just bringing it forward. Or maybe they have our lawyers. Our lawyers do research for us too. We do our own research, but then we ask our lawyers to research it even further to make sure we're doing everything legally and ethically. And so I encourage them, if you have ideas, if you read something, if you've seen some type of laws that you're interested in passing in Springfield, bring it to us. Let's do it together. I'm not here to take credit for it, because it doesn't matter as long as it's right and it's getting done. And so I just wanted to express that we need our constituents, we need everybody's voices, and collectively we can get more done. And so you go out and vote, we still need you to push things forward, to move things forward. And then when you get involved, you learn more.
And just to add to it, and related to our recent protests / march that we had at Nathan Bill's, I think one of the issues that was at the forefront as to why folks didn't show up, especially some of our colleagues in government, was that it took place in the highest voting ward in the entire city. And so I would imagine that folks didn't necessarily or were reticent about being present in that particular ward where we were protesting a popular business in that ward for fear of how it might impact them in the future. But what I think they neglected to realize was that people within that ward are knowledgeable as well, and they want to be on the right side of history also. And so the response that I heard from that ward was overwhelmingly positive. But I do think people were cognizant of what if something went wrong, and what impact would that do down the road when it comes election season. For me, I didn't factor that decision in. My objective was to be in the place where I felt was going to have the most impact and bring the most attention to the wrongs that we have happening in the city of Springfield. But I certainly know that folks factored that into their decision of whether they were going to be present. And so if we can just get our other wards to make counselors feel as conscientious about being present or not being present when something is being held in that particular ward, it would go a long way.
So here's a question. I'm going to pivot after this question, but I want to get one perspective from each of you, right? And how do ordinary citizens hold elected officials accountable? So just one way per counselor and senator. I'll start with you, Senator Lesser.
Well, voting is the most obvious, but what I would say is don't underestimate, I want to be careful because we get a lot. I read every email. Myself, my office, we read every email. We get a lot of phone calls. We get a lot of emails. We read them. A human being reads every single one. And the personal ones, and we probably all feel this way, there's form emails. That, frankly, is less effective. But if somebody is reaching out in a personal way, they're sharing something about themselves, their families, that goes a long way. Most of us run for office, get into this to do the right thing. And I can't speak for everyone, but I think us on the stage here today, or in the sanctuary today, we're there to make the decisions when it's hard. why we do it. And so I mean, like, I think my plea to people who are watching is feel empowered to reach out to us. You know, and if it's personal, if you take the time to do that, you know, we'll respond. You know, it might not be immediate. Sometimes it takes a couple days, but don't underestimate that. You know, really don't underestimate the power of just personal outreach and personal contact, especially with local and state officials. You know, federally in Washington, that's a little bit of a different story. But all of us are close. You know, we're out and about. We're in the communities. So really don't underestimate that.
Great. So personal contact through email, letter, etc. City Councilor Whitfield.
I feel the exact same way. Personal contact, I think if you just try to communicate with us without trying to put us on blast and, and gain some understanding of our perspectives and just talk to us, even if it's through social media or whatever channel that folks feel comfortable communicating to us, I think it'll be great. When I first became a city councilor, there was a group email to all the councilors. And I didn't know if anybody responded, but I said, I'm gonna respond because I feel that I'm obligated to. And I responded with something that this constituent did not like. And we actually went back and forth a little bit. I'm rusty, you know, I go back and forth a little bit. And, but by the end of the conversation, I said, well, maybe let's get another perspective. I'll reach out to the appropriate parties, have them reach back out to you. And she said, you want my vote because you're the only one on the council who responded to me. And so it's important that constituents reach out to us personally, and it's important for us to respond. But I want to also say that we have a lot of constituents reaching out to us, and some of us don't have assistance or backup or help to help us filter through some of those emails, calls, and letters, and social media. So just remind us and charge it to our head, not our hearts, and just trust that all of us on here, that I know personally, we are responsive. We are out there. We do want to know what your thoughts are, and we will get back to you.
I would say show up. Come to the chambers. We have public speak out before every regular meeting. Let your voices be heard. And when you can do it in numbers, the better. I've seen a number of times in which councilors go into the chambers before a very important vote, and they look out into the crowd and they see a number of individuals filling the chambers, overflowing the chambers, and passionate about a particular issue. And I've seen them switch their vote at the drop of a dime, simply because their one was a public speak out beforehand in which people were actually expressing how it is that they felt about a particular issue, and two, because they came out in numbers. And then the last thing, I'll echo Councilor Whitfield's sentiment. I'll never forget this attorney that came down to the chambers, and she said, and I left a message for you, Councilor Hurst, and you never responded. And I'm mortified. One, this is being televised. Two, I try my darndest to get back to everybody. I mean, I just do. And come to find out, she had left a message with our administrative assistant, who felt as though they had given her an adequate answer, but it was never conveyed to me that what she really wanted to do was talk to me. And so it just goes a long way, and my heart was beating extremely fast as the president of the council, and somebody saying on local television that I hadn't responded to her. I was mortified. And we have a great council, and a number of councilors I know personally get back to constituents very quickly, and so I would just reach out.
All right, great answers. I think it was from, all had to do with reaching out. And I'll add one to the chorus, which none of you mentioned, but every Sunday morning I have to take up an offering. And the reason I have to take up an offering because we need the money to support the vision and mission of this particular church, Mount Zion, and our community center, Dunbar Community Center. And one thing I'll add about being a constituent is having fundraisers for your state senators, I'll just say elected officials, the city council, et cetera, because it's critical that you have funds to run elections and campaigns. Because you have mailers you need to do, standouts you need to do, hire staff, et cetera. And so they didn't say that, but I'll say that it's important that as a community, a part of being a constituent is showing up financially to support candidates that definitely support your issues and agenda.
Sounds like he's offering a co-host. We'll follow up afterward.
Y'all welcome, right?
Thank you.
All right. Here's a question. Let's go to the protest, and let's go to the police, which is the heart of the protest at this particular moment in history. And why do you think, Senator Lesser, we'll start with you, why do you think it's so difficult to critique or to challenge law enforcement?
Yeah. So first, I'll be honest. I mean, I mainly want to listen, and I want to hear from community members about their experiences. I personally don't know what that feels like, to be worried about your safety going out, to be worried about viewing law enforcement as being aggressive. That's not an experience I personally have had, and I want to be aware of that. And my main goal in attending the marches and to attending the events is to listen and to learn and to do my best to be an ally and to lift up the voices of others who have felt that way. So, with that being said, I think that there's a tension because we know that obviously policing is important work. Obviously public safety is important, but there is a culture around policing that is too insular and is not open enough and is increasingly, and this has been a long history, views their relationship with the community really as more of a warrior mentality rather than a guardian mentality. And I think that we all have a role to play in working to shift that mentality towards one of guardianship and partnership with communities rather than aggression towards communities. And it's very hard work, and frankly, there's not a lot of great examples around the country to look at. This is a challenge in every part of the country and in every community around the country, but we do have some examples and some models of good work: community policing, better community partnerships, directing more funding towards social services and social supports and community partnership, rather than keeping police sort of in their cars or behind armored personnel carriers. So it's a culture shift, and some of it is generational. Some of it, I think, is the media. People grew up watching Cops, and they grew up with a culture in the media that kind of built that narrative around policing. And it's really incumbent upon all of us to do our part to change that. And I would point out and say, that there are voices in law enforcement that support that change. And I do think that we need to seek out those voices and those leaders and those allies and build them up as well.
Thank you. I'm going to shift it a little bit. So the two of you, Councilor Hurst and Whitfield, spoke passionately at the protest or March for Justice on Saturday, last Saturday. And when we arrived to the location, it was a little jarring to see that the business was boarded up, and then Bank of America was also boarded up for some reason. And 4 days prior, that Wednesday, we had 3,000 people who marched the streets of Springfield and 0 incident. And so 4 days later, that Saturday, it's amazing why the business thought to board themselves up, and really that entire plaza. So tell me, what do you see as why it's difficult to even have a critical conversation around our local police, and what we feel should be a slam dunk issue becomes such a divisive issue when right is right and wrong is wrong?
I think that we have antagonists out here that if you go against them, they feel like it's a personal attack, when we're really just trying to really trying to educate on the issue at hand, and it's personal. I'm not going to say it's not personal. toward the person that we are bringing awareness to the community about, because it is, but the conversations have to be had. And so when I think about the protest on Saturday, I get a little bit emotional about it because from the onset, we only talked about a peaceful protest to get the word out. I mean, we know nationally that the incidents that happened with George Floyd and Eric Brown, those are atrocious atrocities, but we have them right here in the city of Springfield. I always talk about Delano Walker. Me and his mom went to school from middle school together, and he was a 15-year-old boy that was murdered, I'm gonna say, by the police, and by a police officer, and that officer got off, and they won a civil suit. So it's near and dear to my heart. That was my first protest. That was my first time standing up for something because she asked me to, and I didn't know how to do it, but I did it anyway. I figured it out. And so we have to call those type of issues to the forefront, and even if it's the commissioner. So when you hire back 5 officers that are under indictment and being investigated by the Attorney General, and you bring them back to the police force, and you put them on the street, and they could cause harm to other cases if they arrest someone, it's not right. And so I remember when Council President Hurst wrote a letter, I didn't know about it because I was on medical leave, and I read it in the paper, and I called him, and I'm like, what? What's going on right now? And so we had a conversation about it, and I was like, no, who's backing you? What, I mean, this is wrong. This is clearly wrong. Who's backing you? Where are our colleagues at? And he was like, he didn't say anything negative about our colleagues, but I was
might
like,
have.
but I was like, I'm gonna write something. I'm gonna write something. I'm gonna support this because officers, no matter what position you in, if you are doing wrong, if you are doing something that is not just and for all communities, we're supposed to be here for all communities, but so are they, then we need to call it out. And when you talk about accountability, that's what you do, you call it out. We should not sit silent and just let these things continue to happen, you know? So at this point, because of the decisions that are being made on the administration side, and even calling all of the police forces to the protest and everything that they're doing because they feel targeted or attacked, I don't think that's the right way to handle the situation. I really think it's a little bit immature and petty. And it's our responsibility to bring those issues to the forefront as city councilors, as elected officials, and that's what I will continue to do.
Great. Do you want to add something to that?
Well, a lot was addressed. I'm just disgusted. I really am. I just expect better. I expect better of those in government. Don't call me and try to deter me from having a protest if you're supposed to be a leader in the city of Springfield. I don't have it in me to be nice anymore. I'm the president of the council. I've been very deferential. I've played nice. This issue is real. If they're fearful for one day, for a couple hours, and that's why they're boarding their windows, just imagine walking my shoes. Walk in your constituents' shoes. Don't call me and ask me to think about canceling a protest because the owners who were involved in the cover-up and the beating of 4 individuals that look like me, who at no point in time, as of yet, have highlighted the wrongs that occurred that evening. Now we're suddenly supposed to be concerned at the fact that they're boarding up their windows? Everything about the student protest on Wednesday was highlighted as peaceful. When Councilor Whitfield, myself, the NAACP, and Pioneer Valley Project put on a protest, now all of a sudden we want to insinuate that it's not peaceful. We care as much about the safety of our residents as you do. I was baffled. And then when you want to put us at the forefront because you think something is going to go wrong and you want to make it a political issue, because if something does go wrong, we know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to say it went wrong at the hands of 2 councilors. This is not a political issue. Don't make it one. The police commissioner, whoever writes for their Facebook page, the idea that you're going to put a peaceful prayer protest was going to be held and slow up traffic on the morning of that Saturday. And then right above or below that, you're going to say a protest march put on by Council President Hurst and Councilor Whitfield is going to slow up traffic on Island Pond Road, and at no point in time you're going to put in peaceful. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. But, I mean, we start talking about these systems and what helps to perpetuate these systems. That's leadership. And when it's poor, it's poor. Don't get mad at me because you chose to reinstate 5 officers whose cases haven't been adjudicated. Where does that happen? Where does that happen? Don't get mad at me because we're holding a protest at Nathan Bill's. Don't get mad at me because I'm mad that you gave Nathan Bills $10,000 in the name of COVID-19 because their business is struck. $10,000? The same folks that were accused of covering up a beating of 4 individuals, you gave them $10,000 of taxpayers' money, of grant money that could have been going. So my patience has run thin.
And can I add, let's reverse the scenario. Mm-hmm. If it was a Black-owned business and 4 white individuals were beat by officers that were patroning that business, would that business have gotten that $10,000? I am disappointed that the administration would use petty tactics by over-policing a peaceful protest to scare us into not doing it. All you did was add fuel to the fire because we're not scared, we're tired.
So for those of us who are listening who may not be familiar with the whole incident, you can read about it on Mass Live and other publications regarding the incident that occurred a few years ago and still working its way through the legal process. But that brings me to one point. I know we have a question from the Facebook community around defunding the police, and I'll throw that to you in a little bit, right? So we got that question. We'll get to it. But the question I have for you is about $850,000 were paid out in a civil settlement. Where did that money come from? Who paid it? And who's responsible for paying that money in this particular incident?
Me.
Taxpayers.
Justin.
Taxpayers.
All of you, taxpayers. If you're a resident in the city of Springfield, you're paying these claims.
So this is a question, and I didn't rehearse this question, didn't write it down, so bear with me and let me work through the logic of the question. If police misconduct, if wrongful death suits are brought in civil court, correct? And we're paying out $850,000 for this particular incident. Others have been $300,000, et cetera, and taxpayers are responsible for that bill. Why isn't it a public outcry from the taxpayers to say something isn't right if we're continuing to pay for misconduct and these police officers are still not being held criminally accountable, but we're continuing to pay this bill? Where's the public outcry regarding our tax dollars going to support people who still have a job at the end of all of this?
Well, just to chime in on that, Pastor. So first, to back up on the previous point from the last question, something that I think just adds insult to injury with this is protesting is nothing new, and protesting in the city of Springfield is nothing new. And I didn't see the National Guard called for the Women's March. I didn't see the National Guard called for the Science March that happened. I didn't see the National Guard called for the climate change protests, all of which I'm in enthusiastic support of, but I didn't see the National Guard or really any excessive police presence at all at any of those marches. So this is just something that I think people see and I think viscerally have a very justified reaction to, that it doesn't add up. And again, especially because after seeing, I think it was 3,000 at least people on Wednesday who were completely peaceful. I would actually add they were earnest. They had people picking up litter behind the protesters. They had volunteers literally picking up the garbage as the march went and cleaning up and leaving everything even better and cleaner and more orderly than they found it. So it's just something for people to consider. On the point of the settlements, part of the reason why I think there hasn't been outrage is because there is no transparency about how much is actually being paid and how astronomical these amounts are. In Massachusetts, a progressive state, a state we hold up as being enlightened, we spend tens of millions of dollars statewide on these settlements. And so, frankly, just avoiding that necessity of those payouts to save money so that we can spend on hunger programs, on literacy programs, on everything else that we need should be motivation enough. But I think people would really be shocked if they saw the scale of this. And more information has come out. A lot of times these settlements, have non-disclosure agreements attached to them, are exempt from FOIA requests. So it's very hard for journalists, for the public, for activists, for nonprofit organizations to even get a sense. And I point out on some of the recent events that had happened in Springfield, one of the only reasons we even really know about them is because we actually still do have a fairly healthy daily newspaper, and we have Mass Live. I would actually connect all of this to the decline we've seen in local journalism. Because if we didn't have a newspaper, and you see coronavirus is devastating local journalism all across the country, in communities that don't even have that, it's even worse because it's even harder to get the word out.
So let me ask, we have a question from the Facebook audience. Who approves, the question is, who approves this taxpayer payout?
We certainly approve the money. There is no doubt. By the time it gets to us, it's so late in the game. I'm sitting here. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I wanted them to get more at Nathanville's. To be honest with you, when you look at what occurred, it was. I think we can talk about it now, right? The settlement is done. I don't know. I might want to be careful as the case is still being adjudicated. So I want to be careful about that. But when it comes to us, it oftentimes it normally is in the best interest of the city to settle, because otherwise you very well could have been subjected to a lot more. But don't get it wrong. When we go into executive session, we are upset. We are disappointed, and we're mad at the system that allowed it to get this far.
So I worked in the finance department for the city of Springfield, and I actually worked on the law budget. And so what they do in the law budget, there's a settlement line, and they underfund it for budget purposes. They'll put $300,000. So they'll say, oh, we're only spending $300,000 in lawsuits or cases that were won. By the time it gets to the city council, the decision has pretty much been made, because we don't want it to go to trial, because then we're going to have more fees that we have to pay, and if they win more We may have to pay more, although the city of Springfield has a cap of paying out $1 million. And so, by the time it gets to us, we're getting all the facts, we're trying to understand what the problem is, what caused it to get here, and that's when we ask the questions, well, why are these officers continuing to get away with this? Where are the investigations on the local level? Why aren't they being charged criminally? The taxpayers are paying for the wrongdoing, obviously the wrongdoing that they are doing, yet the taxpayers are paying for it. And I think that the taxpayers, like Senator Lesser said, is a lack of education. Because if you look at the budget, you would think, if you even look at the budget from the previous year, you'll think we only paid out around $300,000 of settlements as a facade. Because I asked that question, why you only have $300,000 in this budget? And last year, I know we paid out $1.3 million in settlement cases, and that's the answer I got. We don't want folks to think that we have all this settlement money, or we don't, want to publicize how much we paid out in settlements the previous year, because then folks might sue us more. Well, that's not transparency. And this is something that I was told personally, and I know for a fact.
Wow. So I'll wrap it with one more question. Do you have a 30-second response to what the defunding the police movement is?
We're elected officials. We don't have a 30-second response to anything.
Y'all worse than preachers, man.
So, but sorry, we'll take a shot. We'll try.
Thank you. Defunding the police.
Oh yeah. So, so for me, what that means is reallocating and reprioritizing how we are spending money on a federal, on a state, on a local level. We of course need public safety. We of course need police departments, but they need to be more community-based, and the budget needs to be a reflection of our values. And so the money needs to be reallocated towards community efforts, towards de-escalation, towards better training, and frankly, weapons of war and military vehicles, that we see in Baghdad and in Kabul should not be in American cities. And frankly, that money should be saved and reallocated into things like rail investment. We got good news today, just to stay on one of my issues, but we got good news today that the Mass Department of Transportation 5x'd their ridership projections for what Springfield-Boston connectivity would be. But it's gonna be expensive. If we're gonna really make progress on creating good jobs, good paying jobs for people, in reinvesting in communities, creating opportunity, and that will actually, in the long run, keep all of us much safer. We've got to have the budget better reflect our values, and that's what the movement is really about.
Thank you. So I want to spend, I am out of time. Hey, we'll work with it, right? 3 minutes, right? Pastoral privilege, 3 minutes on this issue, because I read about this in a newspaper, a press release, around the Citizens Police Commission. And I think the council voted on this at some point, and the mayor vetoed it, and then the council voted to override the veto. And then I saw something lately surrounding that you're looking for a pro bono lawyer to take it on. Do one of you want to speak to the Citizens Police Commission and or how it's different from the Community Police Hearing Board?
So the Community Police Hearing Review Board can only make recommendations when it comes to discipline. The Police Commission will ultimately be responsible for hiring, firing, and discipline. The Police Commission will be made up of 5, hopefully, community leaders with a vast array of experiences. The unfortunate part about a police commission is that those individuals will also be appointed by the mayor. But the hope is that, and the reason why we passed it is that those 5 individuals, it's much easier to hold those individuals who have to go home to the very communities that we all live in, hold them accountable than holding one commissioner accountable who is hired and appointed by the mayor. So it's a law that's on the books. There's an argument as to whether We had the power to create a police commission, according to the mayor and the mayor's attorney. They certainly don't believe so, and so we are seeking an attorney to hopefully answer that question. We believe we're in the right. Certainly the mayor does too, although from the way in which I've looked at it, I think they're wrong. So, you know, we'll see how it plays out, but hopefully we will get that attorney and you know, get a decision in the near future. It's better than what we have now.
Right. And the reason that we're asking for a pro bono attorney, like I said before, we cannot add to the budget, and so we will request that we have funds so we can hire our own personal attorney for the city council. However, the administration will not add that funding to our budget in order for us to seek out that lawyer and hire our own attorney. And so we don't have the funds in the budget currently to secure a lawyer, and so that's why we're asking for help from the community and help from different organizations to help us attain a pro bono attorney so that they can see the case and we can get justice.
One thing I can assure you is that a police commission, those 5 individuals, would have never reinstated those 5 officers that just were reinstated by the police commissioner, who were charged with aiding and abetting and helping to cover up the beating that happened at Nathan Bill's.
And fully supported by the mayor.
You know, and I think just, you know, on a state level, one piece of reform that I think we desperately need is there needs to be an independent process for investigating complaints. You know, let the process play out. Let the facts lead where they need to lead. But I think what we've seen in case after case after case is that the district attorney's offices have just a built-in conflict of interest. The district attorneys have to rely on the police departments for all of their other cases and prosecutions. It just doesn't work to have the local district attorneys also investigate discipline. So you need to remove that process. You need to remove those complaints and bring them to an independent citizen board, to a state board. I think it's telling that it was the state AG that brought the cases, you know, here in Springfield. There is a built-in conflict, and that has to change. And so I think one of the things that we're going to be working on a state level is how we can create some automatic mechanisms so that when there is a credible complaint, a credible issue with the use of force, that investigation is removed from the local district attorneys and is conducted by an impartial, independent examiner. And frankly, that isn't everybody's interest. You want the ultimate decision to have credibility, and you want the facts to be the dictator of the outcome, not conflicts of interest.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys being here tonight. State Senator Eric Lesser, City Council President Justin Hurst, City Councilor at Large Tracye Whitfield. And this is part 1 of our critical conversations as we discussed faith and policy. Part 2, tonight's session, will focus on faith and protest with some great religious leaders here in the city of Springfield, Bishop Talbot Swan, Reverend Catherine Cummins, Dr. Barbara Headley. And so that session will begin at 7:08. We'll go live again at 7:08 p.m. And so we're looking forward to that, and tune back in, like and share this session and also the next session that will begin around 7:08 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.